Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Missle Industries Ford Falcon XC Wagon Crusty Wagon 351 Wagon Project Wagon. Now this episode I'm going to put an exhaust in this car. When I bought the car there was an exhaust that was on the floor of the garage nearby, but it was a single 2-inch exhaust system with the Y pipe up the front. And it was very rusty, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to go out of my way to say, hey, could I have that too? I'm just going to leave it there on the floor of their shed and pretend I didn't see it. So that left me with a wagon with no exhaust system and a 351 Cleveland exhaust to build. So that's what this episode is going to be about. My plan, which has been taking shape slowly over the last few months, was to get a set of headers for it, get the mandrel bent pipes that go over the diff and out the back of the car, and then make the bit in the middle out of leftover exhaust parts from my, from the Commodore that I dismantled to steal the motor out of way back last year. I still have that exhaust system. Nobody wants to buy it off me, so I've decided I'm going to chop it up and use it as donor exhaust for this project, because the Commodore exhaust system is 2.5 inches and it has 2 mufflers on it and 1 back box, which I'm not going to use. I just want to use the mufflers and the pipe, maybe even the Y pipe. I'm a bit undecided about that because I'm sure a Y pipe would help with the scavenging and all of that, but I've never had a Cleveland powered car with a Y pipe before, or a merge pipe, whatever you want to call it. I've never had a Ford Cleveland car with a merge pipe. It's always been 2 separate banks right to the back of the car, which is fine by me. So what I think I'll do is I'll put the extractors into the car, see how much space I have between the extractors and these pieces of mandrel bent pipe, and see how much middle section I'm going to need to either buy or cobble together with my other spare parts. So you would think there'd be headers everywhere available for these Cleveland motors, but there weren't. I found a set for sale in Capella, but the guy who'd had the ad up for 72 weeks was adamant that they were worth every cent of the $430 that he wanted. So after trying to persuade him to part with his headers, I gave up on that and I looked further afield. And then a set of headers cropped up in Redcliffe one weekend, and I thought to myself, I reckon they'll do. I said to the guy when I went to look at them, so these are for the column change automatic car? And he said, yeah, absolutely they will. Just take my word for it. So I paid him his $300 and I took these headers home, and they've been in the shed ever since, probably since October last year. But recently, these DEA mandrel bent 2.5 inch back sections cropped up on Gumtree. And they had also been for sale for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks for $200, which is only slightly cheaper than you can get them on eBay. So I said to the guy, take $100? And he said no. So that was sad. So I upped my offer to $150 and said, well, you don't know until you ask, just in case I offended him. And he said, the cheapest I will do these for is $180, which is still not very far off the full retail price on eBay. So I counter-offered $160, and then after that it was just radio silence. And then a day later he agreed to my terms and said, when can you come and collect them? And I basically said, I will come collect them after work today. So I went and got them last week on, I think it was Tuesday, and they've been in my possession ever since. So I'm most of the way to getting this exhaust system underway. I just need to make some measurements, order some more parts, and then kick this off. As you can see, the car's not painted yet, but I'm working on it. I just need to sum up the motivation to put that paint on the car and risk the disaster that could befall me if I get it wrong. I can hear you saying right now, but wait, the wagon is longer than the sedan, and these pipes are sedan pipes. Pretty much that's all that was available on eBay, so I thought to myself, well, if I need to make extra length, I can just add that length in. I've got extra pipe and I can order more pipe. I will find a way to make these work, because For the price I paid, I'm fully prepared to chop these up if necessary. To gain a greater understanding of where this exhaust system is going to sit, I should probably put this rusty old man bumper back onto the car. And I say old man bumper because there is the round socket adapter for the tow bar, which no one uses anymore, and there is the obligatory spotlight mounted to the back bumper to improve reversing at night time, which is what I would consider a typical old man feature of a car. So this stuff needs to come off before I clean this bar up and retest fit it to the back of the car and figure out how my exhaust pipe's going to stick out. Now that's much better. Nice and clean looking. When I say clean I mean uncluttered. Oh, one more thing. Bye bye old. One more thing. Give this thing a quick clean because reasons. These bars come up really nice if you just give them a bit of love. Okay, fast forward several weeks and it's time to get stuck back into the exhaust project. As per usual, it's another rainy weekend and there are sirens howling in the background, but nevertheless, let's soldier on and get stuck into this project. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is cut those 3-inch flanges off my 2.5-inch exhaust system, because whoever had this exhaust system before me, particularly the headers I'm referring to, must have flanged it to a 3-inch system. No, I don't need to do that. 2.5 inches is going to be perfectly adequate to maximise my ground clearance and promote fast exhaust flow. I mean, that's what the sedan has, so I'm just going to go with that. So the bench has been cleared off and my drop saw is plugged in and ready to go. So first things first, I'm going to lop those flanges off, possibly even tack on the 2.5-inch flanges I have sitting on the floor next to the headers, because once the headers go in, those flanges really need to be fitted, tacked on, so that I can position the rest of the exhaust system in relation to them. I don't want to weld them on entirely and trust my luck and then just have to re-weld them again after I realise I stuffed it up. So headers chopped, flanges tacked on, headers installed, and then I can start with the rest of the exhaust system, however that goes. Okay then, step 1, headers have been modified to accept the 2.5-inch flange that I'll be using on the rest of the exhaust system until I use the V-bands. 3-inch flanges have been removed and these 2.5-inch flanges have just been tacked on. I've orientated them the same way that the old flanges came off. Hopefully that makes sense and is the best opportunity for access and ground clearance. And I guess the next thing I need to do now is try and get them into the car. Great news, the left bank of extractors has been mocked into the car and the power steering lines are going to need to be massaged out of the way for this to continue to work. They're pulled out of the way right now, but they do need to be bent in line with this new sweep of the extractors through that space next to the engine and the firewall. So that shouldn't be a big deal. At the rate I'm going, I think I'm going to have to remove the power steering lines altogether and bend them out on the bench and then put it all back in the car and hope for the best. If you look down yonder, these extractors are very hard to see from up here because they're black. So they just blend in to the engine bay, but trust me, they're bolted in at the front and the back, not the middle because it's enough of a headache to get to the front and back ones. So those extractors are in place, and now we'll move under the car, and from under the car they line up with the cutouts in the gearbox crossmember. And my flange position is probably not the best, but I can still get a flange into there and a bolt onto that flange where it is. So I'm going to just leave it for the time being. I'm pretty happy with that. That is pretty tucked up as well, and that's what I want, because I need to maximize the ground clearance of this car because I have a terrible driveway for ground clearance. Well, day 2 of my exhaust project draws to a close and the headers are mocked in. The left bank clears everything pretty well, so I'm going to take a little bit of adjustment on that side to clear that last little bit around the transmission crossmember, unlike the right side, which is actually touching up in here, and there's clearance between that and the speedo cable housing up there on the firewall. It's actually touching the speedo cable housing as well, which is a big thick rubber grommet, so I'm going to trim that back, mark the spots that are touching here and there, and hammer the shit out of them, because that seems like a viable way for me to do these at this budget level. I will hammer that in, and I will hammer that section further up there. I don't know if you can see it. That rubber grommet there on the firewall is literally touching the headers. So tomorrow I'll pull the right set of headers out and give it a bit of a hammering and then reinstall, which probably explains why it was such a pain in the ass to get all the bolts in, because the headers aren't quite there. As day 2 of my exhaust project draws to a close, it's time to summarise today's activities. Now, both sets of headers are in. The left side headers went in pretty easily after I disconnected the power steering lines from the pump and from the engine crossmember, and they slid right in, so that was no big deal. The driver's side, on the other hand, I had to steer the steering all the way to the left, so that the pitman arm was hard up against the chassis rail, and I had to pull the starter motor out to get the old manifold out, so that may as well stay out for the time being. And after I moved the steering hard lock to the left and dropped the power steering line down on the right side of the engine crossmember, the headers actually went in pretty well. I still have power steering lines and transmission cooler lines to reposition to make this all work, but it turned out those headers actually went in far better than I expected. Now, I have some fine tuning to do to the headers so that everything clears, but trust me, this is nothing compared to what I went through to get my BMW to work with the LS in it. So feeling pretty good about this so far, and tomorrow I'll pick this back up and do some clearancing before I get on to chopping up that old VY exhaust system to make up the rest of the exhaust system for this car. Right, it's time to start dealing with the clearance issues for this right side header, and starting off with this janky weld here, I'll just smooth that out a bit before I take to this bit here with a ball pin hammer, and hopefully I can get some clearance. This one over here I'll have a bit of a whack at as well. Might just grind that high spot off. This might take 2 or 3 attempts of reinstalling and removing before it comes good. Alright, clearancing effort number 1. I've battered that in just a little bit and also battered that in there, just there. I've actually cut away the rubber sheathing as it pokes out of the firewall for the speedo cable that's touching this. So hopefully I can get a gap of about 5mm, that's what I'm chasing. This is the side of the engine that doesn't lift up under acceleration, so it should theoretically twist away from the floor under load, so it just needs to have enough gap so it doesn't touch anywhere, because that's going to cause annoying vibration sounds and I don't want that. So the clearance goal here is to have at least 5mm of clearance once it's all buttoned up. So let's chuck these in and see how it goes. Pretty hard to tell from this angle, but I've actually got good clearance between the handbrake cable fitting on the firewall and the headers now. There's a few millimeters in that, and I'm going to finesse that a little bit more once these come out again. And if I look here, that's improved too, but it's going to need more hammering. Alright, round 2. Much more beatings have taken place this time. Hopefully that is enough to satisfy my clearance needs, because if it's not, more beatings will be required. Finally, there's a gap. It's only about 2mm, but at this stage, maybe it's 3mm. I'm just going to go with it because there's exhaust fab I'd like to get onto. So the extractors are in. I'd like to thank everybody that replied to my last YouTube video with their advice. As it turns out, you were spot on the money. To get a set of extractors to fit into one of these cars, you need to first jack the car up off the ground as high as you can get it, pull the power steering lines down out of the way, remove the column shift linkages, pull the starter motor out, and then it should just be a case of sliding those 2 sets of extractors in each side of the engine and bolting them up. That was pretty much the formula I used after receiving all of that excellent advice. Summary time for episode 28 of Missle Industries exhaust installation saga. So I've managed to get the extractors in and clearanced, and to be perfectly blunt, I'm out of time. So what I thought was going to be one episode, building the exhaust system, fitting extractors, etc., it's going to blow out into a multiple weekend job. So you're welcome to join me in subsequent episodes where I fumble my way through this for the rest of this exhaust build. So next episode I'm going to build the merge pipe junction between the headers and the back boxes. Hopefully that includes hanging the back boxes as well, but we'll see how we go. It's taken 3 days to get to this point, and I'm not really sure how my fabrication skill is going to go within a limited time frame, so I'm just going to let this blow out, and it takes as long as it takes. Here are my merge pipe pieces in the cold, cold light of day, and I'm reasonably sure I'm going to have enough radiuses amongst this lot to get the merge pipe connected to the collectors of the extractors, and then move on to the rest of the system. So let's get into that.